You are listening to the Advocates of Aging podcast. This podcast is produced by the ABA Commission on Law and Aging. Listen to hear interviews and stories on topics related to law and aging, including best practice tips for professionals and career advice. Age is not just a number, it is an opportunity for growth and fulfillment. These episodes will explore the hurdles people face when aging, as well as opportunities for improving advocacy and strengthening the legal rights of others.
Hi, I'm Jessica Brock, here along with Erica Costello. We're with the American Bar Association's Commission on Law and Aging. You are listening to our Advocates of Aging podcast. Today, our guest is Aisha Elmquist. Aisha Elmquist is the director of the Olmstead Implementation Office for the state of Minnesota. Aisha has an extensive history advocating for the rights of older adults and people with disabilities, most recently as Deputy Ombudsman for Long-Term Care in Minnesota. She served as a staff attorney at Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid, worked as an attorney for Fox Rothschild LLP, and clerked for U.S. District Court Judge John R. Tunheim. She is experienced with leading large-scale collaborative efforts. Aisha was a Borchard Fellow in Law and Aging and a Policy Fellow at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs. Aisha is also a graduate of Carleton College and the University of Michigan Law School. A complete copy of Aisha's bio will be provided in the notes on our website. Welcome, Aisha. We're excited to talk to you today. Thank you for taking the time to be with us and share your work in the field of law and aging.
Yes, thanks so much, Aisha, for coming and joining us today. Thanks again for joining us today, Aisha. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your career and how you ended up where you are today?
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. So I'd say that the interest in working with older adults started from a very young age. I volunteered for nursing homes when I was in high school. When I first went to law school, I went with the intent to practice elder law and to work with older adults. So I focused on that as much as I could in law school. There weren't a lot of specific classes or anything like that. But those that were available, I took. And then, as was mentioned, my first job out of law school was the Borchard Fellowship on Law and Aging. And in that position, I specifically focused on discrimination against older adults in long-term care settings and also in their own homes, whether that was discrimination by a landlord in rental housing or discrimination with respect to services. So I worked at Legal Aid for a number of years, including after my fellowship, clerked for the judge, ended up at the state working for the Office of Ombudsman for Long-Term Care. And there I focused a lot on the rights of people in nursing homes and assisted living facilities, as well as people receiving home care in their own homes. And now I work on the rights of people with disabilities under the U.S. Supreme Court decision, Olmstead BLC. That would be the rights of people with disabilities of all ages, including older adults. I've done a lot of work related to disability rights more generally throughout my career also. I have really loved working with older adults throughout my career and continue that in my position today.
That's so interesting because we don't often hear people express an interest in doing elder law specifically when they're in law school. And so now it sounds like, that was something that you were very interested in from the very get-go. So tell us a little bit about what really attracts you to this area of law.
Absolutely. I always enjoyed being with older adults. Even as a child, I was often in the church basement with my grandparents talking to older adults and being pen pals with different people and spending time at nursing homes and other settings. It was something I always really enjoyed and enjoy to this day. So that was part of what drew me to it. And then family connections to the disability community for people of all ages, and really having a passion to work for disability justice, to work with elder justice throughout my career. I do, of course, think it's great for people that become interested in it later as well. I have a lot of colleagues who didn't come into it with that same sort of, this is what I'm going to do, as soon as they entered the law school door and are wonderful advocates in the aging field. For me, though, it was something that I definitely had in mind early on, and I'm so glad that I've been able to continue throughout my career.
You mentioned how you have worked both in the aging space, but also in the disability rights space. What do you see as your role in the context of the aging field or the disability rights field?
Currently, my role is a little different than it has been through most of my other positions. Up until now, I've either been a lawyer, a practicing lawyer, or at the Office of Ombudsman, I was an advocate I wasn't technically practicing law. My law degree, I think, was very helpful for the policy work that I was doing and the other legislative and other work that I was doing, but definitely in the role of an advocate. My current role is to work as the director of the Olmstead Implementation Office with 13 different agencies, including the housing agency here in Minnesota, the Department of Human Services, Corrections, Education, Transportation, a variety of other agencies to work on disability inclusion, disability rights throughout the state. And that would apply to people of all ages, from 0 to however old someone is. So it's a very broad spectrum of issues, as you can imagine, with the number of agencies that are involved, the number of ages that are involved. But the aging population, older adults, are certainly an important part of looking at rights. And sometimes I think that gets lost, where people who are older adults with disabilities may not be part of the conversation as much when we're talking about the ability to make choices for living at home, whether we're talking about guardianship or where someone lives, housing choice, service choice, and really making sure that we are having that conversation in the context of aging and people with disabilities who are older.
It sounds like your experience is both varied and now certainly very multidisciplinary, working with a lot of different agencies and professions. Is there something that has surprised you in your career, especially in the area of aging, either personally or professionally, as you do this work?
Yes, I would say one thing that has surprised me is one of the phrases that is so important in the disability community is nothing about us without us. And particularly in the aging context, although really for all people with disabilities, that can get lost. And I have been in many spaces, whether they be working groups, committees, where the subject is to talk about primarily, if not exclusively, older adults with disabilities. And the people who are there are either exclusively professionals, or if there are community members, it often will be the children of older adults, the adult children of older adults. And not to at all say that the children don't have an important voice in that space. They absolutely do. I have been surprised that older adults themselves often have not been at those tables the way that I would like to see them, and many others would like to see them there. So working with community is one of the things that I'm doing in my current position, and many others are working on as well, to make sure that as policies are being set for people with disabilities, regardless of what their ages are, that the people most affected are at the table.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because that aspect of community is so important in, I think, both the aging field as well as working with individuals with disabilities. So talk to us a little bit about the work that you're currently doing right now that's really exciting to you and how you became involved in that.
Absolutely. So Minnesota has something called an Olmstead plan. So the Olmstead VLC is a U.S. Supreme Court decision, recently came up on its 25th anniversary as a decision last year. And it says that under the Americans with Disabilities Act, People with disabilities have the right to make choices and the right to be in the most integrated setting. And it was a case initially brought by two women in Georgia, Elaine Wilson and Lois Curtis, and they were being institutionalized when that was not their choice and it was not necessary. And so very grateful for those two women and many women thereafter and other people thereafter who have stood up and really emphasized the importance of those rights. So in terms of what we're working on, states often have something called an Olmstead plan, which is meant to be the state's plan to implement the rights under Olmstead. And we are working in Minnesota on the next version, a new Olmstead plan in Minnesota. Our original plan was put in place around 2015, and it has had changes since then, not huge, substantial changes. So this is the first time that the plan is being looked at more holistically in terms of what we're going to be bringing forward and what is going to change. And part of what we're doing, which we're very excited about, is we recently entered into a contract with a company that is going to be bringing on consultants with lived experience of disability. So that means there will actually be community members, paid community members, at the table with the agencies as they are writing the next version of the Olmstead plan. And that advertisement for those consultants is actually out right now. It will be closing next month. It is for people in Minnesota. And we will be bringing on 20-ish consultants with lived experience and are really excited about having people of diverse ages, disability types from throughout the state who will be part of creating the next plan.
That sounds like very fascinating work. So what are you seeing then as the most pertinent issues in the field right now?
There are so many that I could start with. The staffing shortage is certainly a significant issue, looking at staffing standards, looking at training, really the importance of that support and quality support for the quality of life and the rights of people with disabilities who are receiving long-term care services, whether that would be in a more institutional type setting or whether it is in community, and also expanding community options, expanding home and community-based services, and expanding the ability to make informed choices. And as we do that, also looking at the rights of people in settings that are not nursing homes, for example, in assisted living, in home care, looking at things like evictions, service terminations, retaliation, making sure that as we are providing more community options, which is so important, that we also have the rights and protections that should be in place for these other settings. And that's certainly something that I've seen a lot of through the cases that I've had as a lawyer in court, and also those where I worked with clients where it did not go to court, seeing the things that could happen really emphasize the importance of those rights and protections.
Sounds like you are engaged in some really exciting work. Very excited to hear you'll be hiring around 20 folks with lived experience for your committee. I think that's terrific. Do you have any words of wisdom for attorneys in the field of aging, or maybe law students or new attorneys who are considering it or don't even know what it is? Any words of wisdom for folks?
Yes, one of the pieces of advice I would give is to reach out to people in the field or to people in other fields that you may be interested in. I took a couple of years off after college. I was working in government in DC at that time, deciding whether I wanted to go to law school or what was next. And I reached out to a lot of lawyers and asked them, hey, would you be willing to have a coffee or a short phone call, whatever they were available to do, to ask them about their careers. And that was very helpful for me in getting information and also in making connections that were helpful later on. And I would give that advice to people who are currently in law school, who are new lawyers, really anyone. It's so great if you're thinking about a new opportunity to reach out. And I remember one example in particular. I was in law school and there was one lawyer who was on the West Coast, and I had read a lot of his articles and materials, and I was going into this fellowship, and I was pretty nervous, I'll admit, but I got up the guts to email him and just say, this is who I am, and I've read some of the things you've written, and I was wondering if you would talk to me. I'll actually share. It was Eric Carlson of Justice and Aging. And he was so open to talking to me, and I keep in touch with him to this day. We've presented together and done different things together, and not everyone is going to. Eric and many others are very busy and may or may not have time for that at any given moment. But my experience has been that whether someone is available for that in the moment or not, that people understand and are very welcoming to making those requests and reach outs. And I've had some really great experiences as a result of doing that. So highly encourage it.
That's some really great words of advice for people. And I think it's great if people could reach out and sometimes do the hard thing that sometimes they don't want to do, right? But thank you again so much for joining us today. And if anyone's interested in further information on this and other topics, you can check out our podcast notes on our website. You can also listen to this and other episodes by visiting the ABA Commission on Law and Aging's YouTube channel. Remember to like and subscribe to be sure to get any updates. We look forward to having you join us on our next episode. In the meantime, keep on advocating for the legal rights of all.